Welcome to lesson 5. We have our socially valued resources. So this is very, very big dot point, very important dot point. It's a dot point that we look at prior to our focus study, but we also then apply it in our focus study. Now, without fail, there has been a question in every single HSC, except for last year. Last year was the only one it didn't. But you still mention it in your responses and in your language anyway. There's always, 9 out of 10 times, a socially valued resource question in your HSC. So very important dot point here. Okay, so we're going to read through this together, these three, and then I'm going to talk you through what each of these kind of pages is and what I want you to do. So, what is a socially valued resource? Okay, if you can create a concept card of this, that would be great as well. Socially valued resources enable full and equal participation within society. Full and equal participation. Equal opportunities, I'd underline that one, to access facilities such as housing, education, the justice system, employment, healthcare, and technologies. These are the 6 different areas. Okay, so I'll highlight that. Man, you're probably going to be highlighting this whole thing. That's your concept card there, though. That one there. Anyway, continue on. So societies function most effectively when all individuals have equality of opportunity and their rights are both respected and protected, and social inclusion is essential in achieving this. So across these areas within society is where people will experience either inclusion or exclusion in areas of education, employment, technologies, housing, healthcare, and the justice system. Access to SVRs, which is what we're going to call it short for, is essential in achieving social exclusion, as full and equal participation in society and building meaningful relationships are both important for social cohesion and mobility and life chances. So that's a huge dot point. That could be an introductory sentence to any essay about socially valued resources and why they're important. Okay, you get a question, explain the importance of it. This could be a point. If you get assess the importance or assess the impact of, you can always use that sentence. That's a really good one to have. Because if you're lacking in these areas, as we looked at with our reading, you experience marginal social exclusion. But if you have access in 2 or more, even here, you are experiencing deep social exclusion. Social exclusion and inequality occurs when there is a limited access to these SVRs. And if you're going to highlight that one there too. And then this one too. I skipped ahead a little bit. So despite most of these being embodied in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, embodied and agreed upon, which we're going to look at in a second. That's why they're so important. Because if you don't, failure to provide all groups in society with access to SVR leads to social dislocation, disempowerment, and social exclusion for some groups. Okay, so that's why it's important. The reason we're linking it with human rights is because if we're asked a question in a HSC and we're talking about the positive impacts of it, we can reference the human rights. Okay, it's a human right, therefore it has a positive impact because it's increasing social mobility, cohesion, XYZ. It's also important to refer to that if your HSC question is looking at the negative side of having a lack of access to an SVR. So you can say it's a bad thing because it's a human right. It's something that everyone is bound by and that everyone is entitled to just for being born a human. So therefore, if they don't have it, they're experiencing exclusion. So it's really good to always reference it back to a human right, and that's why we've got that sort of here. And I'll just put a little note here, although it's not an area here, if you're in a rural and remote location, so your environment, there's our concept that links here, access to every SVR is much more difficult than if you lived in an urban or suburban area. Housing is harder to come by, healthcare is less accessible, the justice system is harder to access due to either a lack of law enforcement, lacking in terms of staffing, as well as getting into courtrooms, as well as following up on any crime rates or anything. It's a lot slower. Technology, I'm sure you've all been out camping and there's no reception somewhere for starters. But in terms of even things like shops, reception's a big one as well though. Employment, there's less job opportunities out bush, just because of the sheer size of it isn't as big as somewhere like a major city or an area like where we live. And then education is important too. Teachers are the single biggest factor that improves student outcomes, and the fact that there's a lack of teachers in the heart of Sydney currently, it's 10 times worse out in the bush where they just can't staff anywhere. So really, if you're rural and remote, all of these are expanded tenfold. So what I've done is I created these cool little infographs for you, which look at all of these different areas. They give you a little brief overview of what each socially valued resource is and why it's important. So education is important for the ability to read, understand politics, write letters, and is crucial to our life course. Technology is important because it's a part of our everyday life. It gives us access to facilities and social institutions at micro, meso, and macro levels. Even if you look at little things like technology, like in COVID, we're all scanning New South Wales service apps and things like that. So it's just so embedded in society now that if you don't have access to it, you're really disadvantaged. Employment is obviously really important because in a nutshell, it's our income, and those goods and services that we rely on need money to be able to be paid for. Groceries, utilities, any services you need in and around the home, all require you to have some form of employment to get cash flow in to be able to do that. Housing is a fundamental human right. It provides you safety and security. So being able to sleep, have shelter, and prepare meals are essential, and that's what your housing is for. Some people have limited access to housing because it's too expensive, or the housing that's around is really, really bad. We're going to look at that later on with Aboriginal Australians when we look at some of the housing that they're experiencing out west. It's quite awful. Healthcare, really important because that drives a lot of metrics which we use to measure success within countries. We've got life expectancy, outcomes, overall physical health. All of these things affect our ability, and mental health too, to be able to participate in society at a meso, micro, and macro level. So that's really important there. And then the justice system, the application of law. It's essential to have an inclusive society, and when things aren't going right, when things do go wrong, you need a strong and fair justice system to be able to stand up for people that face social exclusion. So no one should be targeted unduly by police or other law enforcement. The law is there as the unbiased method of justice. I mean, the word in itself, justice, when we looked at this early on, justice is fixing the system to give everyone equal access. And so it's hugely important for a socially valued resource. So yeah, that's sort of your quick pro quo page. What I'll get you to do is, can you do a concept card on each of these? One on education, one on employment, one on technologies, and write down what I've written here in the white text there on each of them. And if you really want, you can draw the little images I made too. I made this on Canva. It's such a good poster. I'm very proud of it. So concept card all of those. Okay. Then what I want you to do as well is concept card these as well here. So what I've done is these are our SVRs in the same order, but what I've done here is I've linked it to the human right. Okay, that's really important. So you're going to have two sets of concept cards for each. You're going to have one on what it is, and then you're going to have one where it links to the human rights. So education, for example, Article 26 in the Human Rights Charter states, everyone has a right to education. It should be free, compulsory, and made generally available, and should be equally accessible at all to everyone on the basis of merit. Okay, so that's the human right article. So I've linked all the articles here that relate to our SVRs. So why that's important, is that the upholding of these rights is what the whole world has agreed is this should be the absolute baseline and standard of living for everyone. And the idea that it promotes justice, that it promotes equality, that it promotes equity, and that it promotes that everyone should be safe. The idea that we say in our Australian Constitution, where it says everyone, I'm sorry, not our Australian Constitution, when our Australian values on the Department of Home Affairs website, where we talk about having a fair go, that's what all this is about. It's all reflecting the fact that everyone, as a human right, should have access to education, employment, technologies, housing, healthcare, and the justice system. So, once you've done that concept card on this page, concept card on that page, we then move to employment. And then we move to education technology. So what I've done is I've broken down each of these, and how I've done it in 3 sections. There's a word bank at the end for each of you. There is why it's important as a socially valued resource, how it promotes social inclusion, and how an absence of it creates social exclusion. So you're going to have points across each of these things, why it's important, how it promotes social inclusion, and how, if you don't have it, it creates social exclusion. And you're going to have that across each of these areas in a general sense. Now, you're going to have them on your concept cards. You're obviously going to do your summaries on this as well, so it's a big lesson. However, at the end of this lesson, you're going to be absolute pros. You're going to know what 6 of them are. You're going to know why they're important. You're going to know how they give you inclusion, and you're going to know how they give you exclusion if you have an absence of each of these areas. So working your way through all of those, come and see me if you have any dramas there. Once you have done that, I've given this page here, and you've got a bit of gaps here. This is kind of like a verbal vomit kind of page, or not a verbal vomit, a word vomit page. What I've given or written here is each of the 6 areas of socially valued resources. And we're looking at how does Australia support inclusion regarding employment? How do they support inclusion regarding education and all of that? So I want you to write different areas where you can see evidence, and it can just be quick short dot points of where Australia supports this. Now, obviously a lot of these are going to come from the government. So if I'm saying education, for example, education in Australia is free, okay? For public education, that is. Obviously you can go to private education, but public education is free. It costs you nothing to go. I mean, you've got to pay for uniform and maybe excursions and things like that. But in the event you can't, there are systems in place where the school pays for it, and that's through programs the government's put in. So education's free. So that's an example of social inclusion. If we look back at the human rights and the SVR regarding it, is that it should be equally accessible to all. We tick that box there. Where do we do it in regards to employment? You might talk about during COVID, we had JobKeeper, for example. We do have Centrelink. We have other services like that can provide. There's government agencies who can help you get a job if you're unemployed. So there's different areas there. So I just wanted to go through a lot. Healthcare, we've got free healthcare to a certain extent with Medicare and our public healthcare system. With our justice system, you can get representation if you can't afford it. Whether or not it's going to be the best legal representations, and I guess another thing altogether, but you still have access to it. So I just want you to think of as many things as you can where Australia supports inclusion across all of these realms. And then I want you to write a practice HSC question, and then we're going to mark and go through it in class. So you need to have done this before getting to class on the day, okay? Because we're going to go through this on Thursday. So, explain why access to socially valued resources. Thursday, sorry, I meant Friday. Wrong day. So explain why access to socially valued resources is important in achieving social inclusion. Okay? So asking to explain. Explain why. Explaining meaning cause and effect. We know that. So why is access to socially valued resources, why it's important? So we're talking about why it's very important. Hint, hint, it's a human right. Hint, hint, equality. Hint, hint, social cohesion. Hint, social mobility. All of those things, why they're important in achieving social inclusion. Okay, so you'd be wanting to have 2 peel examples that you can talk about there, which would be really good. Now, the examples you might want to talk about, I can leave up to you. We've got heaps of different areas you can look at. I would probably do 1 paragraph where you talk about it in general, and you generally talk about why they're important in achieving social inclusion, and then your next paragraph you might want to hone in on a particular SVR if you like, or you might even want to link it to, I won't go there, you can pick your own, but I think having a go at that, what we're then going to do in class is mark it based off our criteria here. So this was a past HSC question from I think 2 or 3 years ago. So I have that ready to go, and yeah, thanks for listening.